David, this morning in today's Telegraph, Alistair Heath has a piece entitled Starmer's Holiday from Reality is Over after the conclusion of the state visit. What's your take on this?
I think that's absolutely true. Fundamentally, Starmer is in a series of extraordinary binds. The first of them is the absolute unreality of most Labour policy. Um, and what's again, it's very striking. Starmer, in terms of foreign relations, especially with Trump's America, has been able to suppress all his natural instincts. His natural instincts, the old Starmer denounced Trump with every unfavorable word in the vocabulary, but he's in the interests of trade deals, in the interests of trying to first of all, put together some sort of coalition to continue to sustain the Ukraine. And he is not simply being polite, as we've discussed before. He has positively prostrated himself, like a provincial noble before the emperor, especially when the emperor was in his Scottish golf course. But what he's shown an absolute complete inability to do is to perform the same sort of exercises in domestic policy. So what we're seeing now is, of course, one of the conspicuous items of business that where there was the open defiance, if you like, of Trump, is the decision to recognize Palestine. Uh, and again, it being dressed up as under noble motives. The shocking nature of Israel's battering of Gaza, the constant havering: is it genocide? Isn't it genocide? And whatever. But the plain truth is, of course, it's entirely buying off the left of the Labour Party, which is hooked on Palestine, and very powerfully, of course, desperately trying to hang on to the Muslim vote, which is similarly obsessed with the issue of Palestine. All that is going to come back. The whole question of how far the Labour Party is anti-Semitic as part of that. If you actually look since the Palestinian question, since October 7th, the number of recorded, and clearly vastly more, recorded incidents of anti-Semitism in Britain has doubled. There's been a spectacular, as you would expect. So there's that. There's also, of course, the ongoing fiscal crisis. Remember, you're immensely fortunate. People have often commented on the slightly wacky nature of some of the members of Trump's cabinet, but equally there are some people of astonishing weight and seniority, particularly Scott Bessent, again, the Secretary of the Treasury, who was very prominent at that dinner. I met, I too, long ago, had very minor acquaintance with him through the fact that I was then heavily involved in the Prince's Trust, where he was also very active. But there you have really very substantial people. And you've got a Secretary of the Treasury who understands markets, is dealing with, of course, to find out you are, if you weren't a reserve currency, you're in an even worse state than we are. As you know, following particularly the Biden debauching of the current of your public debt, you are paying $1 in every 5 that you raise in tax is being paid in interest on your national debt. The figures are staggering. We're paying 1 in 10. But these are extra. But you've got in Bessent somebody who actually understands markets.
Interesting that you mentioned Besant, because what some may not know is he's come a long way on Britain, certainly. He was the chap that executed the famous trade in
Fully
1992.
aware he worked for Soros.
Exactly.
The demon of MAGA, the man who is in many ways, I think, rightly blamed with the whole of the extreme World Economic Forum view of the world, the dedicated internationalist, the absolute opponent of borders, the belief in open frontiers, in mass immigration, and everything else. And Scott, naughty boy, executed this man's principal coup when he literally broke the Bank of England back in 1992. No, it was. Indeed, Black Wednesday. But I think what is striking is you've got there your equivalent of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is somebody who profoundly understands capital, profoundly understands markets, knows how to deploy political intervention creatively. Here we've got a parody. We have Rachel Reeves. We have a woman who is completely hooked on the failed Biden model. I mean, this again is something that people in Britain really, they have obviously registered, that Farage is jolly interested in what President Trump does. I don't think they've realized that the Labour Party is at least as fascinated with America as the right here, and the relations of the Democrats and Labour are absolutely like that. But much more importantly, the whole of Labour's economic policy is modelled on Biden. That Rachel Reeves is modelling herself on Janet Yellen and the disastrous policy of this laughably named Inflation Reduction Act of the Biden government, which pumps endless trillions into the American economy, which is why you have had galloping inflation, why the debt has ballooned and all the rest of it. We're trying to do the same here. This myth that you can actually grow the economy by public investment. We are trying to do it without the ability to borrow, which is the only reason that this sort of neo-Keynesianism has got any effect. And the real problem, Lee, and why I think, again, Starmer faces such enormous difficulties. There's just been a letter published today in the Times, signed by former senior civil servants like Sir Gus O'Donnell and fashionable economists, all calling on Reeves to double down on what he's doing. This notion you can tax your way to growth, it's deranged. And I'm
It's
afraid
suicidal.
it's suicidal, and this is what unfortunately he's locked into. And then finally, of course, what did Trump say? Take the military to sort out the channel. He won't. He can't. He is a human rights lawyer, first, second, third, fourth, first and last. And finally, they cannot break that mindset, that hold. In other words, they live in a fictional world of economics. They live in a fictional world of human rights law and so on. And it is very striking, as I said, that the area that he's had no experience on in foreign policy, Starmer has been eminently pragmatic, eminently pragmatic. Whereas in the absolute, but nobody wins an election on foreign policy. It's the great seduction of all prime ministers, indeed all presidents. I mean, you do better on it in America because you can actually do something about foreign policy. I mean, it really does matter if America decides to do something. When we have our shadow armed forces that are not even a will-o'-the-wisp, it makes our positions in foreign policy on the whole make absolutely no damn difference to anybody at all, save in symbolic fashion.
Since we're talking about foreign policy, do you see differences in opinion on Ukraine policy and recognition of a Palestinian state? Do they hearken back at all to other policy rifts between the US and the UK, like the Suez in 1956?
They're rather the opposite, aren't they? I mean, Suez you could have understood as being much more Trump-like. In other words, it was a direct assertion of power, and America dealt with it, A, by slapping it down, and B, by engineering a run on the pound, I'm afraid, demonstrating very coarsely and brutally destroying the premiership of Anthony Eden, who lasted barely 2 years, despite having had extraordinary promise, been a highly effective foreign secretary, one of the major players in the Second World War. I think that again, Starmer is irretrievably, in theory, committed to the, if you like, the liberal, what was called RUBIS, the rules-based international order. That's part of this mindset. And of course, it's something which Trump absolutely rejects, in my view, absolutely rejects in favor of a new realism. But once again, as I pointed out before, with so much of Starmer, there's complete self-contradiction, because we hold the Ukraine up as this great model of a kind of determination to uphold the international settlement of 1945, that no country should ever be allowed to try to change the frontiers of another by war, all of that sort of stuff. But of course, what's actually going on in the Ukraine is something wildly different from this. It's a passionate war of what's called ethnogenesis. Two peoples that have been closely intertwined like that for centuries are separating violently, and people who will have had common, have spoken both Russian and Ukrainian fluently, will have regarded them, anybody who is in their 40s and over will have been part of the Soviet Union, will have regarded all that as part of a common identity. They're being forced to choose. And it's being done on both sides. I mean, there's all the focus on the Russians capturing children, the Ukrainian children, orphaned or whatever, who've been in the seized territories, the Donbass and so on, and Russifying them. Bringing them up to speak Russian and so on. Very similar things, we forget, are actually being done in the Ukraine. You are inventing a nation, and nations are invented in blood and iron. Again, the war in the Ukraine, I mean, just look at Zelensky. It's the most outrageous example of toxic masculinity you could possibly think about. Here is somebody strutting around with a puffed up chest in quasi-uniform the whole of the time. And whereas here, of course, in Britain, there is again this tremendous paradox. The left has loathed patriotism, has loathed, as it were, all those passionate identifications that make people want to fight for their country. I mean, again, the lunacy of Starmer talking big, doing the absolute opposite of what the great Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly and carry a big stick. Starmer, following, I'm afraid, in the footsteps of a certain Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who gets us into all of this, talks with a booming voice and carries a broken reed. It is the complete opposite of the Roosevelt formula. And again, if you look at how Starmer has actually dressed things, we barely had the use of a flag standing alongside the Prime Minister, when he makes a public statement. Now, if you look at when Starmer performs, it looks exactly as though he were an American politician. But of course, it means something completely different. The American flag is that source of passionate, MAGA-esque identity of the rah 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 American great and all the rest of it. Here we have Starmer's lot saying that the whole purpose of the British flag is that it represents diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the idea that that's an authentic form of patriotism, that anybody will be. Can you imagine troops? Now, lads, we've got to defend diversity and inclusion. Over the top you go. It won't happen, will it? So a lot of what, it's not simply that we saw a particular performance in terms of the monarchy and that. you could argue, Ruritanian element. I think so much of Starmer's own performance, the parading of flags, the ludicrous Yvette Cooper saying she has flags at home. I mean, the idea of this she's the most. I had once many years ago to sit next to her at dinner, the most dreary, miserable woman you could possibly think of, and the idea she has her house dolled up in Union Jack bunting is so completely, totally preposterous. But once again, Starmer straddling, trying desperately to straddle all of these things.
And of course, there's someone who hasn't come up at all who is an interesting behind the scenes figure, and I speak of none other than Nigel Farage.
Oh, I thought you were going to mention another unmentionable figure and tell us about Peter Mandelson. Yes.
Oh, no, yeah.
Does Trump normally do this? I mean, after having praised him correctly, because an awful lot of this deal is Peter's work, having been photographed with him enthusiastically in the Oval Office, this blank declaration, never heard of him. The lie direct.
Well, and perhaps there were some things that no one wanted. There was, of course, that awful intrusion where they projected things, on Windsor Castle about Epstein and all of that, and perhaps no one wanted to go there. And
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, because after all, the person who'd appointed the wicked Petey, as he appears in the birthday book, was none other than Starmer himself, and the appointment was an entirely sensible one. Peter was absolutely the right person to do the dirty. Whenever you've got dirty work, there's nobody better capable of doing dirty work than Petey. The only point, of course, he's got to be sufficiently rewarded to say yum yum at the end. And on this occasion, there was no yum yum from. Anyway, sorry, I diverted. You were going to talk about the other great non-shower things. Yeah.
Well, yes, and it's very interesting because one has to imagine that behind the scenes there's a lot of whispering, from Nigel Farage to Trump, but of course he didn't make an appearance, and he's arguably the man in waiting.
But remember again, the whole role of reform at the moment is unlike anything I can think of in British politics. You have a party that varies between 4 and 5 MPs, because every time they get another one quarrels with our Nige and is dropped. So there is this mysterious, one in, one out, a bit like what we're hoping to be able to do with immigrants.
Although I take it you have two now. I heard there was another one.
Two. I mean, I'm trying to work. I'm not terribly good at doing percentage and then thousands. This kind of infinitesimal number. But remember, it is an extraordinary position that they have 4 MPs and are now regularly. The last opinion poll showed them. I think it was on 34%, and the Conservative and Labour parties tying on 16 each, which would give them high 400 seats out of the 600 and odd in the Commons. So you have this extraordinary disproportion between Reform having the initiative politically, Reform scoring highly in the opinion polls, and yet only this tiny representation in Parliament. And that's the thing which, of course, accounts for the weird disproportion in their treatment. That's to say that Farage has got no formal public status, but as you is clearly at the moment the heir apparent. On the other hand, it does raise an interesting question, and we're sort of now going back full circle. Trump proclaimed that he, and I imagine he must be telling the truth, that he insisted that Sadiq Khan, whom he hates, his unfavourite mayor of London, was not invited. I think there's a correct little question in people's minds. Well, if he's capable of saying, I don't want Khan, why didn't he say he wanted Farage? And you know what the answer I would give? good manners. That I think clearly on both sides in this, there's been very, very serious work done. That a high degree of mutual thoughtfulness, of as an awareness that there were pitfalls, there were minefields, all ready to go off, and the absolutely, I think, pitch perfect way in which they were avoided on both sides. And I imagine in this context, well, I don't imagine, I know Farage would have been he would have been the equivalent of standing not on a landmine but on a nuclear weapon.